All right, let's jump right in. We're going to kick things off with a single statistic about slavery in America. And you might be surprised by it. But what's really interesting is how this one number cracks open a much, much bigger story, a story about how systems actually work. So here's the number. You've probably heard it before. The claim is that less than 2% of white people in America actually owned slaves. Think about that for a second. Less than 2%. It sounds small, right? Now, you'll often hear this statistic used to make a very specific argument. The idea is that, hey, if the number's that small, then maybe slavery was just the fault of a few bad apples, right? A small, super wealthy group. It kind of frames it as not a society-wide problem, but the problem of a few individuals. But that's exactly where things get interesting. Let's flip the script. For a minute, forget about the 2%. The real question, the one that changes everything, is what about the other 98%? What were they up to? What was their role in all of this? Because, well, it turns out you didn't have to own a person to be part of the system of slavery. Not even close. Participation went way beyond direct ownership. So, how did that other 98% participate? Well, think about it. The entire economy was tangled up in it. Even if you didn't own slaves, you probably bought products made by them, like cotton or sugar. Maybe you worked in shipping or banking or insurance, industries that made a ton of money from slavery. Then there's the political side. People voted for pro-slavery politicians. They sat on juries that enforced the laws of the system. And maybe the most powerful thing of all, just staying silent, not rocking the boat. That silence was, in its own way, a form of participation. Okay, so this brings up a huge point. If pretty much everyone was participating in some way, then we have to stop looking at just individual choices. We have to zoom out and ask a bigger question. What even is the system that they were all a part of? Right. So, what do we mean by the system? According to the source material, it's not about one person's single decision. It's the whole shebang. It's the structure of laws, it's the cultural customs, it's all those unwritten rules that basically determine who has power, who benefits, and who's left vulnerable. Let's break that down, make it a bit more concrete. An individual act? That's one person owning another, or one person using a racial slur. But a systemic issue? That's the web of laws that made owning a person legal and profitable. It's the widespread housing practices that discriminated. The system is like the engine of a machine, and those individual acts are the gears turning inside it. And here's the kicker. This is why systems are so incredibly powerful. Once they're established, they create this immense pressure to just go with the flow. For the average person back then, the easiest, safest, and frankly most profitable thing to do was to just play along, don't cause trouble, don't question things. The system was designed to reward you for doing just that. All right, so that's the historical view, but here's where it connects to today. The source material makes a really strong argument that this structure, it didn't just vanish into thin air. Nope, it left behind echoes, shadows that we can still see and feel today. And we're talking about direct lines. The sources trace things like the old slave patrols and connect them to modern issues like the disproportionate policing of Black communities. They link that brutal economic exploitation back then to the wealth gaps we still see today. That legal framework that was built to deny people their rights, you can see its legacy and biases that still exist in things like housing and healthcare. It's kind of like the same machine, just updated with new parts. Which brings us full circle, right back to that 2% number. So what's the real story? What is that statistic actually hiding? Here's what gets totally lost when the conversation is only about that 2%. By focusing on that tiny number of individual owners, we miss the gigantic picture. The source argues that slavery wasn't some niche project run by a few bad guys. It was the absolute backbone of the economy, of the whole society. And it was held up by the vast majority, whether they were doing it actively or just by looking the other way. So what was driving this massive system? The source we're looking at points to two huge interconnected forces: capitalism and white supremacy. On one hand, you had capitalism providing the economic engine, this relentless drive for profit that was fueled by free labor. And on the other hand, you had white supremacy providing the, let's call it the social permission slip. It was the ideology that dehumanized Black people, which made that brutal exploitation seem normal or even justified. These were the twin engines, not just back then, but as the source argues today as well, pressuring people to just accept things as they are. And all of this leaves us with one last, pretty challenging question to think about. Once you understand how these systems work,
both in the past and in the present, it kind of forces you to look at your own life, right? And to ask, are we actively trying to dismantle the unfair parts of the systems we live in, or are we, maybe without even thinking about it, just following along?